Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and this is the NFL edition of Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over the NFL games scheduled for Week 2, all 16 of them. In Week 1, we went 11-5, so hoping for some more success right here. If you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to put your football plays in the comment section below. If you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the premium picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games for Week 2 of the NFL season. First up, we see your Thursday Night Football contest between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chiefs are 4.5-point favorites. The total is set at 54.5. And this total opened up at 53. It was bet up to 54.5. And I think there's some value now on the under here. As although both of these offenses are great, we saw the Chiefs put up 44 points in Week 1. I still think both of these defenses are pretty good as well. You look at the Chiefs, they held Arizona to 282 total yards. They forced 3 sacks. They didn't really let Kyler Murray do much of anything in the passing game. And I think they'll do well in this spot also. And look on the other side, the Los Angeles Chargers defense really stepped it up from where we saw them last year. And I think both of these teams have a lot of playmakers defensively as much as they do offensively. And we saw 6 sacks forced by the Chargers defense in Week 1 against Las Vegas. So I'm going to take the under of this game. I think it's going to still be a game where we see some points on the board, but 54.5, we still have some wiggle room. Even if we see a 27-24 final score, we're still way under the total. So give me the under in this Chargers-Chiefs game to start the week. Next up, we see the Carolina Panthers taking on the New York Giants. We're going to see the Giants as a 2.5-point favorite, and the total set at 43. Now, I think one word you're going to hear me and others say in regards to Week 2 of the season is try not to overreact. Overreaction can really hurt you from Week 1 to Week 2 of the NFL, and we saw the New York Giants win 21-20 on the road in Tennessee, a very tough environment against a really good Titans team. They had the best record in the AFC last year. But I still think there's some glaring issues with this Giants team, including their secondary. Ryan Tannehill really didn't exploit that secondary in Week 1, but I do think quarterbacks in the future will be able to. This Giants secondary has some work to do. We saw a lot of holding flags, pass interference flags from the Giants defense. Late in the game, Tannehill was able to move the ball through the air in that 2-minute drill, and if it wasn't for a missed field goal, the Titans would have won that game. But Derrick Henry didn't do much in the ground at all. It was a pretty big win for the Giants' run defense, and I still think that it will be strong in this game and in going forward. But I think Baker Mayfield has the weapons, guys like DJ Moore, guys like even in the backfield and Christian McCaffrey, to exploit this secondary, and I do think the Panthers will be able to move the ball in this game. On the other side for the New York Giants, I also think there's some issues offensively. Daniel Jones still got sacked 5 times in that game. He still fumbled, lost a fumble. He still threw an interception. I still don't think he's the answer at quarterback for the New York Giants. And even though Saquon Barkley was running wild on the Titans in that first game, 160-plus rushing yards, he was basically the team MVP for the offense there. I don't think it's going to be the case week after week. We saw the Panthers' run defense face a really tough ground game in the Cleveland Browns, and they struggled. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt did a very good job in that game, but I don't love this Giants offensive line. Even though they've got some nice young pieces, guys like Evan Neal are really starting to step it up. I'm not quite there with the New York Giants offensively, and I do think the defense still has some issues, especially in that secondary. So I don't see the Giants as favorites in this game. I think there's some value with the Panthers because of that Week 1 performance, and I'm going to take the Carolina Panthers plus 2.5 points. I think they win this game outright. Next up, we see the New York Jets taking on the Cleveland Browns. We're going to see the Browns as 6-point favorites. The total set at 40. This is one of the lower totals of the week, so we should expect a low-scoring game. The Browns, I can get behind them winning this game outright, but laying 6 points in this type of ball game, I'm not sure I can get there. The New York Jets did a really good job against the Ravens on the ground last week. The Ravens are a very efficient running team. They had the 3rd most rushing yards per game, just ahead of these Cleveland Browns last season. The Ravens love to run the football. Lamar Jackson loves to run the football. He does it very efficiently. But in that game, the Jets held him to 3 yards per carry and only 63 total rushing yards. So against Nick Chubb, against Kareem Hunt, and against this Cleveland Browns very good offensive line, I do think the Jets will compete, and they will force Jacoby Brissett to make some throws that he may not be very comfortable making, and I don't think the Browns will be very comfortable with him making them either. He went 18-34 in his last game, a 53% completion percentage against the Panthers. Wasn't the best performance. He made the situational throws, but only a 4.3 yards per attempt on his throws, so only 147 passing yards. He's not going to air it out. He's really relying on his ground game, but if the Browns are not able to move the football on the ground as well as they did in week 1, I think they're going to struggle offensively. The Jets offense was starting to pick up some things as the game ended in New York in the first week against the Ravens. Joe Flacco wasn't the best, but he still had over 300 passing yards, still had a passing touchdown. The Jets' ground game had about 5 yards per carry, so I think the Jets lost that game in week 1 because of some mistakes. The special teams was not good. We saw a lot of bad punts. The Ravens had a really good field position. But I think in this game, we're going to see a little bit different. I think Robert Saleh leads the Jets to a cover at least, and maybe even an outright upset. Next up, we see the Washington Commanders taking on the Detroit Lions. We're going to see the Lions as 2.5-point favorites, and the total set at 49. Now, DeAndre Swift was placed on the injury report this week. He is questionable for this game, but this Detroit Lions offense was really strong in week 1. And I do think it's going to be pretty good this season as well. As you saw them earn 181 rushing yards against a pretty good Eagles defense, and they put up 35 points as well. The defense was not good, and I don't think it's going to be very good this season for Detroit. They gave up 38 points. They gave up a ton of yards on the ground and overall, and it was a struggle last year for the Lions defensively. But this offense, good offensive line, they can move the ball on the ground. Jared Goff, not my favorite quarterback, that's for sure, but he can make those situational throws. And Carson Wentz on the other side, I don't really trust him in a road spot here. Had 2 interceptions last week. It wasn't his best performance. He did have 4 passing touchdowns, but overall, we saw the Commanders not really do much on the ground, and that was the weakness for the Lions defense last week. So if the Lions can get a little bit of luck defensively stopping the run, I think they're going to make the day difficult for Carson Wentz, and I think they're going to be able to put up some points early and often. I think this is going to be a closer game. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I lean towards the over, but I'm going to take the Detroit Lions in the end to grab a W and lay the 2.5 points with the home team in Detroit. Next up, we see the New Orleans Saints taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs are 3-point favorites on the road, and the total is 44.5. Now, Tom Brady has not had much success against these Saints in his time with the Bucs, as the Saints have won each of the last 4 games of this series. There's been 4 upsets in the last 5 games of this series, and I think this is going to be a game where the home team does have some value on them, and the Saints getting those 3 points at home, but to me, I think the better play is on the under. I think both of these defenses are strong. We saw the Tampa Bay Bucs only allow 3 points in that game against the Cowboys. I know Dak Prescott went out in the middle of that game, but it was more towards the end of it. The Bucs defense did a great job against Dak and Zeke and the Cowboys offense, and only gave up 244 total yards in that one. Didn't give up much on the ground. The secondary was fantastic. They earned 4 sacks as well, and I think the Bucs defense will show up here as well. The Saints defense wasn't their strongest performance in week 1, that's for sure, but on paper, this is still a very talented Saints defense. And we saw the Buccaneers struggle a little bit in the red zone last week. A lot of field goal attempts. They had 2 sacks as well. And I do think this is going to be a lower scoring game, a slower game. We see a pretty low total for a reason. I think both of these defenses step up. So give me the under in this Bucs-Saints battle. In our next game, we see the New England Patriots taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers are 1-point dogs here at home, and the total is set at 40.5. So the Patriots 1-point favorites on the road, despite losing to the Dolphins in a pretty rough way on the road to start the season. Now, Mac Jones didn't have a great game. The Patriots offense didn't do too much in that one, only putting up 7 points and 271 total yards. But the defense was still strong against the run. Didn't let Miami do much. They only had 65 rushing yards allowed, 2.8 yards per carry. The secondary wasn't great at times, but they still got to the quarterback quite a bit, forcing 3 sacks. And I do think the Patriots defense will be strong in this game against the Steelers offense that I wasn't really impressed with. Now, I know the Steelers won that game in Cincinnati, a very tough spot, 23-20 in overtime, but Mitch Trubisky did not look great for Pittsburgh. He only had 194 passing yards. The completion percentage was only at 55%. Didn't make too many mistakes, didn't throw an interception, but really wasn't a game changer for Pittsburgh offensively. And the ground game didn't do too much either. Najee Harris is banged up. He's on the injury report, so we'll have to see if he gets the start in this one. But the Steelers only 3.4 yards per carry. They only had 267 total yards, and they won that game by 3 points in overtime, a very exciting game, but they had a plus five in the turnover battle in that one to only win a game by 3 points in the final seconds of overtime. When you have you force 5 more turnovers than your opposition has, that's a little scary, especially when a big part of those turnovers with TJ Watt is not going to be playing in this game. I can't get there with the Steelers, even though they're in their home opener here. Even though the Patriots offense wasn't great in week 1, I think the Patriots win this game. So give me the Patriots on the money line. Next up, we see the Jacksonville Jaguars hosting the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are 4.5-point favorites, the total set at 47. Now, even though I'm not going to talk about the side in this one, I'm going to look towards the total. I do want to mention that the home team is absolutely dominated in this series. They're 8-0 straight up and 5-1-2, so that's 5 wins, 1 loss, 2 push in the last 8 games against the spread. The home team is in this particular series, so automatically it's worth a look to take a look at Jacksonville. But I think the over is the better play in my opinion. The Colts offense started to get things going in the second half against Houston week 1. Matt Ryan over 300 passing yards in that game. Jonathan Taylor, one of the better running backs in the league, and the Colts have a very good offensive line. Taylor had 161 rushing yards in that game and 31 attempts. He is their workhorse back, and he is very talented. So I do think the Colts moved the ball quite well in this one, but I also think the Jaguars started to pick it up in the second half offensively in their week 1 game. We saw them put up 19 points in the second half. Trevor Lawrence started to pick things up. We saw a couple passing touchdowns as well, and I do think that this is going to be a higher scoring contest, a back and forth kind of game. Even though both of these defenses on paper aren't too shabby, I think both of these teams' offense is going to exploit the weaknesses. I think the Colts have some struggles and have some issues in the secondary. I think the Jaguars certainly have some issues in their secondary as well. So give me the over in a game that I expect both quarterbacks to have over 35 passing attempts. Give me the over in the Jags-Colts. Next up, we see the Miami Dolphins taking on the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to see the Ravens as 3.5-point favorites, a total set at 44.5. This is a really tough game, in my opinion. One of the tougher ones to look at this week, but should be a very entertaining game as well. We've got two teams that are 1-0, both straight up and against the spread. Dolphins beating the Patriots as 3.5-point favorites, 20-7 in that one. The Ravens beating the Jets as 7-point favorites, 24-9. So both teams' defenses held the opposition to under 10 points. Both teams' offenses didn't really need to do too much. The defenses did most of the work, but they look good in spots. We saw Tua Tagovailoa, about 70% completion percentage, a touchdown, 270 yards through the air. The run game didn't do too much in that one, but the Patriots' run defense is pretty stout, so no surprise there. But the Dolphins, they forced some takeaways. They stopped the run. They had a couple sacks themselves. The defense looked really good. On the other side, the Ravens, they took advantage of short field position. The Jets' special teams really struggled there. They didn't do too much on the ground, which is a little bit surprising and a little bit worrisome going into this game. The Ravens, one of the better run teams, like I mentioned earlier in the video last season, and they love to run the football with Lamar Jackson, but he only had 17 rushing yards in that game. I think this is going to be a close one. I think having those 3.5 points, not a bad idea. If this game is decided by a field goal late, this could be a back-and-forth game. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game, but I'm going to take the Dolphins. I'll lean towards the under as well in this one. Next up, we see the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams are 10.5-point favorites, a total set at 47. The Rams, they did not have a good week 1, that's for sure, losing 31-10 to the Bills. It was a bad game on both sides of the ball. The offense, only 243 total yards. Stafford, 3 interceptions. The defense giving up 31 points and 413 total yards. Even though they forced 4 turnovers, they were +1 in the turnover battle, the Rams were, but they still lost the game by 3 touchdowns. I don't think this team is nearly as bad as that performance. I do think they are going to be much better as the season continues and in this game. And I do like the Rams to win this one, but laying that many points in this type of game, not an easy thing to do. I do think the Falcons will hang around, at least in the first half of this one. We saw the offense, it wasn't too bad against the Saints. They put up over 400 total yards in that one, but the defense for Atlanta, I'm still not in love with it, especially the secondary, and it really struggled in the second half, especially the fourth quarter of that game against the Saints. So I like the Rams to win this game and cover in the end. I'm going to lay the points with Los Angeles at home. Next up, we see the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Seattle Seahawks. The Niners are 10-point favorites at home. The total set at 42.5. Now, the Seahawks won the game on Monday Night Football 17-16 over the Broncos. They were 6.5-point dogs. The line moved up to 7 before game time, and they won it outright. They only won by 1 point. They got a couple of beneficial spots where the Broncos fumbled at the goal line twice. The Broncos really mismanaged their time in the 2-minute drill, and they kicked a 64-yard field goal for some reason. But the Seahawks got a win nonetheless. The 12th man really helped them, but they're not going to have that in this game. They're on the road here, and San Francisco, coming off a pretty frustrating loss, they were in control of that game in the first half, but they struggled in the second half, especially offensively. Now, some of that was because of the conditions on the field. The rain was unbelievable, but both teams played in those conditions, so there's no excuse for the Niners at all, but the defense still looked very good. I think Trey Lance and the offense will be a lot sharper when they're playing at home in front of their home crowd and not going to have that kind of weather hurting them there. So I expect a big game here for San Francisco overall. I like Geno Smith. You got to give him credit. 23 of 28 passing, It's an 82% completion percentage. He had 2 touchdowns, didn't make too many mistakes, but I don't think he's a viable starting option here. Give me the San Francisco 49ers on the laying the 10.5 points at home. Next up, we see the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Dallas Cowboys. The Bengals are 8-point favorites. The total is set at 43. Now, I think there's some value here with the home team in the Cowboys, and I know it's not easy to take Cooper Rush in this spot, especially with the Bengals coming off a loss, but this line opened up. The look-ahead line for the Cowboys was -2.5 against the Bengals in this one. When Dak Prescott went down with the injury and it was learned that he was not going to be able to play in this game for quite some time, the Cowboys moved to 8-point dogs, 7.5-point dogs now to 8. That's a 10.5-point line move. To me, that's just far too many for only one player. I know it's the most important player on the field and for the offense, but still, Cooper Rush last season had to come in for Dak Prescott when he went down with an injury, and that was against the Minnesota Vikings. It was on the road in Minnesota, very tough place to play in, and the Cowboys were 4-point dogs. The Cowboys won the game outright 20-16 behind Cooper Rush, who had 325 passing yards in that game. The Cowboys found a way in that game to win it outright, and while I don't think they're going to win the game outright here, I still think they find a way to keep this game competitive and close and cover the spread in the end. I think it's just far too many points, getting more than a touchdown with the home team. Cooper Rush, I think he's one of the better backup options at quarterback. Obviously, you don't want to see a backup quarterback in there. And Dak Prescott, I wish him a speedy recovery, and I do believe when healthy, he's a top 10 quarterback in this league. But Cooper Rush, I think, is good enough. The Cowboys have some issues offensively with their offensive line. Tyron Smith is a big loss for this team, and they didn't do much against the Buccaneers, but the defense was still strong, and they held the Buccaneers in the red zone plenty of times. They only gave up 19 points. I think this is going to be a lower-scoring game. We saw Joe Burrow, 4 interceptions. He didn't have a lot of time in the pocket. The Steelers put a lot of pressure on him. I think this Bengals offensive line is not the greatest. We saw 7 sacks the Bengals allowed in that game. So I'm going to take the Cowboys and the points here at home, getting the 8 points with Dallas. Next up, we see the Houston Texans taking on the Denver Broncos. We're going to see the Broncos as 10-point favorites, and the total set at 46. Now, for this game, I'm going to go with a teaser, same-game teaser with the Broncos and the over. So I'm going to bring the Denver Broncos from -10 to -4, and the over from 46 to 40 in a 6-point teaser. Now, I do think the Broncos win this game by a touchdown at least. I could certainly see them covering the original spread as well, but I'd like to bring that number down to 4 because I also do like the over in this game quite a bit when we can get it down to 40. We saw the Houston Texans move the ball quite a bit in that game against Indianapolis. Davis Mills had a pretty good game. He's got some talented receivers. He's got a pretty good ground game with guys like Rex Burkhead and Dameon Pierce. So I do think the Texans move the ball on the Broncos here, but I also think the Broncos offense has a very strong performance in this one. I think they put up 30-plus points here, and that should be enough to get us over that total as long as Houston can chip in a couple touchdowns themselves. I think the Broncos offense, pretty frustrating week 1. They moved the ball plenty of times in the second half. They had over 400 total yards, but they fumbled the ball on the goal line twice. Big mistakes in that final 2-minute drive, but with the coaching staff, and I do think that this week a lot sharper performance offensively, especially at Mile High, home opener, first game with Russell Wilson at home. So give me the over 40 and the Broncos -4 in a 2-team teaser. Next up, we see the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to see the Raiders as 6-point favorites. The total is set at 51.5. Now, right now, I'm leaning towards the Raiders laying the 6 points, but what I will say is Arizona, to me, in my opinion, I think the only way the Cardinals can compete in this game is if they get pressure on the quarterback. They virtually put no pressure on Patrick Mahomes last week. 0 sacks. Mahomes had 360 passing yards, 5 passing touchdowns. He had his way with the Cardinals in that game and their weak secondary. But J.J. Watt was out for that one. We'll have to see if he plays in this game, but even if he does or does not, the Cardinals need to be able to put pressure on Carr, and I do think they'll be able to do so at least a little bit. As this Raiders offensive line struggled in week 1, it struggled in the past few seasons. It was really their one glaring issue for this team. They allowed 6 sacks in week 1. Yet again, they were held under 100 rushing yards as a team, only 64 rushing yards in that one. So if the Cardinals are able to get to Derek Carr, I do think their defense will have a lot more success in this game. If not, Derek Carr has his weapons. He's got Devontae Adams. He's got Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. He will have a field day if he has all day to throw. So that's really the deciding factor for me. If Arizona in practice this week is able to work on getting some pressure on the quarterback, if they can get J.J. Watt back healthy, they'll have a chance. But right now I'm leaning Las Vegas after what I saw in week 1. So give me the Raiders laying the points. Next up, we see the Chicago Bears taking on the Green Bay Packers. We're going to see the Packers as 10-point favorites, and the total is set at 42.5. And the Packers have dominated this series, that's for sure, as of late. The last 7 games, all Packer victories, and most of those games by double digits, including last year's 2 games, one of them in Lambeau, 45-30 Packer victory, and then one of them in Chicago, 24-14 in favor of the Green Bay Packers. So I like the Packers in this game by double digits again. I'm going to lay the points with the Aaron Rodgers and company. And we saw last year, the Packers really struggled week 1 against the Saints. They only put up 3 points. It was one of the worst games Aaron Rodgers has had in his career. Really one of the worst games a quarterback had that season at all. But they bounced back in a big way next week. 35-17 victory over the Lions. And then they went on to win 7 straight games in total, beating the teams like the Cardinals on the road, the Bears on the road, the Bengals on the road, the Niners on the road. Now they're back at Lambeau here, their home opener. I think Aaron Rodgers will be just fine, even though he doesn't have his number 1 weapon in Devontae Adams. There was some mistakes made in that first game in that receiving corps with some really bad drop passes in week 1, but I think Aaron Rodgers and this offense will be just fine. Playing a pretty weak defense overall in Chicago. They're not going to have the advantage of playing in that weather anymore. The defense will. And I do think the Packers offensively will have a really strong showing. I expect 30-plus points in this game from Green Bay. I think their defense will also step it up big. So give me the Green Bay Packers laying the points in Sunday Night Football. Next up, we see our first Monday Night Football contest of the week. We see 2 this week on Monday Night Football. This one, the Tennessee Titans and the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are 10-point favorites, and the total is set at 49. Now, I know the Bills were very impressive week 1, and I do think they are deserving of being the Super Bowl favorites. I think, obviously, 31-10 victory on the road against the Super Bowl champions of last year in the Rams. Very impressive stuff. Josh Allen looked fantastic. And the Tennessee Titans themselves also struggled in week 1, losing to the Giants outright at home in a very surprising upset loss. But I still think this is just too many points. We know the Titans have had pretty good success against the Bills in recent seasons. These teams have played on the primetime stage quite a bit recently. And the Titans have won each of the last 2 games of this series in 2021 and 2020. Last year, it was a 34-31 game, a high-scoring contest, back and forth, came down to the wire. And I think this game will be that way. I do think the Bills will still win in the end, and pretty convincingly by a touchdown or so. But 10 points is just a lot to lay. You're facing the Tennessee Titans team that did have the best record in the AFC last year. And I do think Derrick Henry has a much better game in this one than he did in week 1 against the Giants. I think the offense overall for Tennessee will be just fine. And, the defense has some concerns overall, but I still think it gets enough pressure on Josh Allen to keep this game close. So I'm going to take the points here with Tennessee. I know it's probably not going to be the most popular play after looking at what happened in week 1, but I'll take a shot here with Tennessee plus the 10 points. Next up, we see our final game of the week between the Minnesota Vikings and the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the Eagles are 2.5-point favorites. The total is set at 50.5. Kirk Cousins, yet again, playing in a primetime game. He's 8-17 in his career starts in primetime games. It's under 40% win percentage. And even though his numbers himself haven't really been that bad, I think his completion percentage is above 67%. But for some reason, his teams just do not win in primetime games. And we saw last year against the Cowboys, like I mentioned earlier in the video, Cooper Rush, your quarterback, the Vikings at home in a primetime game, and the Vikings still couldn't win that game with Kirk Cousins. But, in this one, I'm going to lean towards the under in this game. I think both of these defenses are underrated going into the season. And the Eagles struggled a little bit defensively against the Lions week 1, but I still think on paper this is one of the better defenses in the NFC. The Vikings last season really struggled defensively. It's one of the reasons why they didn't make the playoffs. And 4.7 yards per carry allowed, over a 64% completion percentage allowed. But in week 1, they did a great job of neutralizing Aaron Rodgers. They got to the quarterback. They forced 4 sacks, and overall only giving up 7 points to an Aaron Rodgers-led Packers team. Very good performance defensively there. I'm going to take the under. I think the total just set a little bit too high. The under in this Eagles-Vikings game to end the week and end the night. And that's it. Those are the games for week 2 of the NFL season. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to put your football plays in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.